Hello and welcome to Breaking It Down, a podcast from the MS Trust. I'm Nick and I'm also joined by our host Helena. Hi Helena.
Hi Nick. We both work here at the MS Trust, which is a charity for people affected by MS in the UK, and we're here today to help you make some sense of MS.
Yeah, that's right, Helena. And today is actually our last podcast of the year. But don't worry, we'll be back in January with lots of topics that people have been asking for and lots of interesting subjects as well.
And this will be our third year that we're doing an episode about what you, the MS community, have been asking us at the MS Trust about this year. It's becoming a bit of a tradition now. So this is a compilation of stats that we get from the MS Trust helpline, who answers inquiries via phone, email, and on all our social media channels. You can even post us a letter if you want to as well and ask questions.
That's right, Helena. And our helpline is free, it's confidential. Anyone can call it. If you're impacted by MS and you're in the UK, you can call us or get in contact with us. We know at the moment that the NHS waiting times are really, really long. And we know that people might struggle to get some of those appointments. So a lot of you have been reaching out with those questions, and our helpline has been particularly busy this year.
And before we recorded this podcast, we also did a little shout out this year on social media on what questions you'd really like to see us answering in this podcast. So hopefully we'll be covering some of the subjects that you let us know about.
That's right. And first up, so to get into the podcast, we are going to be talking to Corinne. She works on our helpline, and we're going to be pitching her some of those topics that you asked us on social media and that you've been talking about this year.
I'm really looking forward to listening to this. I can't wait to hear what you've all been asking. So let's just jump into it.
Hello and welcome back. So we're joined by Corinne from our helpline team here at the MS Trust. How are you doing, Corinne?
Hey Nick, I'm fine, thanks. Are you okay?
Yeah, very well, thank you. So we have you here today with us, Corinne. So we're going to be looking at some of the most asked questions from the MS community that you get on the helpline, and also some sort of more unusual questions that we've been getting recently. Does that sound okay to you?
Absolutely fine. Yeah, I'm happy to be here today and to help out.
Amazing, brilliant. So I guess there's probably no sort of shock here, but one of the most asked questions in at number one that we always get is do I have MS? Is that right?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think that's the one that people start thinking about, possibly Googling online symptoms, worrying about what's going on with their bodies and thinking, right, something's not right. I've got to get to the bottom of this. And I would say that seems to be the question that we've been asked probably the most this year, when people are in that very early diagnosis stage or wondering if they've got MS. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, definitely, Corinne. And I guess that moves us on then to one of the second most asked question is people who have just been newly diagnosed and they're looking for advice.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And also going back, Nick, to the previous question as well, I forgot to add that sometimes people are concerned they've got MS, but it might be something else as well. So there's that worry where it could be another neurological condition. Things we get asked about as well are things like fibromyalgia, functional and neurological disorder, possibly sometimes vitamin deficiencies as well. So yeah, but sorry, I was just backtracking there because I remembered that we do get asked that a lot as well. But you're right. The newly diagnosed question comes with what to do next, really. When you've been given that MS diagnosis, it can feel quite daunting, and obviously it's perfectly normal to experience a whole range of powerful emotions. So often people come to us looking for more information, to empower them, and looking for those who do they first need to tell when they're first diagnosed, and also advice on symptoms about what they can do.
Yeah, it must be such a difficult time for a lot of people going through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it can take a little while. As we all know, it can take a little while to be diagnosed. you know, it's sometimes, it can sometimes happen instantaneously with one incident, and other times it can take several years. So yes, it's, and you're right. And for some people, it's a sense of relief that they know what's causing the symptoms as well, getting to the bottom of things really. But we encourage people to keep investigating and pushing, and it is a worrying time. You're right. Yeah, we do hear that from people, but we're here for people that are in that stage and want to talk really.
Moving on to the next topic
Yeah.
that people ask about lots is, how can I manage my fatigue?
Yeah, fatigue's a difficult one. We get asked that a lot, Nick, on the helpline. It's one of those tricky things that there's sort of not a magic pill or potion that you can take that one cure fits all. Really, it's more about delegating and prioritizing and using the energy you have in the most efficient way. So it's more about knowing when you're most productive as well. So, for example, if you're at work, if you're more productive in the morning, to really do as much as you can in that morning period. And then if you know that in the afternoon you're less productive, then fitting more in the morning and working out how you feel. It's I'd say keywords are managing, delegating, and prioritizing. So in a home environment, if you can delegate tasks to family members as well. It can be a difficult one in terms of getting the good sleep as well, trying to get the good sleep that gives you that energy throughout the day as well. Definitely speak to your MS nurse though if you've got any queries. You can also speak to us as well. MS nurses have got quite a bit of experience about dealing with fatigue, and obviously we've got our Managing Fatigue book on our shop. Yeah, but really it's a difficult one because it's one that affects people the most, I think. And when everybody wants to have energy and feel like they've got energy to be able to do things, but particularly coming up to Christmas, not feeling overwhelmed about the whole Christmas period, and doing what you can when you can, and maybe explaining to family members a little bit about how fatigue is and how you feel. We've got videos on our website as well that you could possibly show family members of how you feel. They might want to watch those so that they can sympathise a little bit and understand it.
But I think when we've talked about fatigue in the past, it's such a complex issue because there's so many different things that impact it. As you were
There
saying, with
is, yeah,
sleep, for example, but then also your
yeah,
sleep might be impacted by the types of medication that you're taking, and then you're
yeah,
more tired the next day and more fatigued.
yeah,
And then obviously
yeah,
that can have an impact on other symptoms as well. And then sometimes that can impact
exactly.
your sleep again. So it's really, really
Yeah,
complex, isn't it?
really complex. And just like you were saying about in terms of the sleep or the exercise side of things, you want to be able to exercise, but sometimes you don't have the energy to do it. So you can get caught in a bit of a vicious loop, which can then affect mobility if you're not being able to do as much exercise through the fatigue. So it's really listening to your body, trying to tune into it more, and doing what you can to know when you're most productive. And obviously when you have maybe gone out and got some fresh air, be it walking or on a mobility scooter or on your wheelchair, it can often feel almost energize you a little bit, and that can then have a good effect on fatigue. So it's a complex symptom, and it's about managing it the best you can.
I think another sort of side kind of related to this as well is that the term fatigue is used
Yeah,
in lots of other areas as well. Like I might say to my partner, like, "Oh, I'm really tired, I'm really
yeah, yeah,
fatigued," and
yeah,
she say,
yeah,
"I've got MS fatigue," and I go, "Oh," and there's
yeah,
that classic thing of someone saying, "Yeah, I'm tired too," and actually it's very different to that experience of someone being tired who doesn't live
yeah.
with MS, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, let's face it, I think we all do that. We can all say, "Oh, I'm tired," or "I didn't sleep very well last night," or "You've been busy with life and feel more tired." But like you say, very similar to what your partner experiences. It's more about an overwhelming sense of fatigue, and it might be not in proportion to the task you're actually doing. It can affect things like spasticity and mobility. So your legs can feel really heavy to work. Sometimes people say that it's almost like they're not drowning, but walking through treacle or an overwhelming heaviness. Sometimes all you can do is just give into it and literally rest, take a nap, rest, or take 5, or yeah, literally, or stop, or sit down and try and almost recover.
Yeah, thank you, Corinne. And on the subject
That's
of
all right. Yeah.
explaining MS to others, so that's actually our fourth
Mm,
most
yeah.
asked about
Yeah.
topic is how
Yeah.
does someone have that communication with their family, with their friends?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that sometimes we do get calls on the helpline where people say, "Who do I need to tell?" When they've been newly diagnosed, and really, the answer to that is it's up to you. And like you say, dealing with family members as well. It's it's completely up to you who you tell. Um, in terms of talking to family members, I guess it's up to you how much you want to tell them. But what might be useful to talk about the symptoms that you experience, how you feel, how it makes you feel. Um, you know, sometimes people feel almost worried that they can't do as much, or certainly in the workplace, for example, I know we do get approached a lot about work as well. So in terms of the workplace, I'd recommend having a look at our working life page on the website. We also direct people to the shop, and there's a document on there about telling your workplace about MS. That can be used almost like a checklist to check in with your employer so that they know how MS makes you feel. There's also another useful document on there called Someone I Know Has MS, which is a very simple breakdown for colleagues, family members, family members, yeah, that talks literally about key symptoms of MS as well. But really, in terms of who you tell, we always say to people, it's up to you who you tell. If you're newly diagnosed, you do have to let the DVLA know because it's a notifiable condition. But in terms of your work, it's up to you who you want to tell. Whether it be your direct line manager for a bit of transparency to let them know, so they're a bit more aware of what you're going through. But it's up to you who you tell, absolutely. And and trying to be open with family members if you need to rest or all sorts of things. You're right. So it can be a bit difficult, and also that understanding side of how can your family understand it. So I think if they read more about it, that does help. As we say, information is power. So please check out some of our resources on our online shop, because that can be a good way to let people know. Yeah.
Definitely, Corinne. And when we say the shop, I think it's important
Yeah,
to say that these resources are free, but they are in our
of
sort of
course.
shop front. So if you do want to, you
Yes.
can order a
Yes.
digital copy, or if you're based in the UK, you can also order a physical copy as well. And they are all
Yeah.
free, so we'll make sure that we can get them to
Yes.
you, and we'll link
That's
to
it.
those. We'll link to those in the show notes as well. Corinne, next up, so in the fifth topic
Mm,
that has been asked about a lot is walking and mobility difficulties. What can you tell us about them?
yeah. Sometimes people aren't always aware of what equipment they might have available that they could look into to help with mobility issues. Sometimes even just through, I say just, it's easy for me to say that, but walking with a walking cane or a trekking pole can help with balance. It can also help with posture, because I think sometimes when you're a little bit, if you're a bit hunched up, walking with a walking aid can actually improve posture and help you walk more upright. So there are a range of walking aids available, or mobility aids, to help you be able to get out and about. So, example, a mobility scooter to be able to get around the shops. Um, and these walking aids, really, it's best to speak to your GP for a referral, or your MS nurse. They can refer you to an OT, an occupational therapist, or a physio who can assess your walking and see what aid might be suitable for you. I know that obviously we've been looking at recently a mobility report that looks into getting around with MS. Ultimately, people with MS want to be able to live a normal life and get around with having MS. So I think it's important to look at the walking aids that are available and explore them and try them out and see what might be there to use, because it can give you confidence when you're out and about, and it can also mean that you can get out and about. So yeah, I think definitely that's something we get asked about quite a bit, about walking aids.
Next up, so we're going to talk about some more unusual questions that you less frequently get
Yeah.
asked, but they're coming up more and more. So
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could tell us about weight loss drugs and MS.
Yeah, good question, Nick. That's something we've heard more about on the inquiry service just recently, actually, about weight loss injections. So I think what's important to add is that to always approach your MS nurse or GP about these things, because they're medications. Now, we're not medically trained on our helpline, but we can also research things and have a little look at what's been explored and what kind of research is out for you, to be able to let you know. We've heard about weight loss injections recently more and more, and they are safe for people to take with MS. Like I said, it's always important to approach your MS nurse on a personal level, just to find out from them directly if it's okay. But it can help for people to lose a bit of weight. And obviously, as we know, losing weight and being able to be a more maintainable weight can help with MS symptoms. We know that through research. We know that it can help MS symptoms. So, yeah, the ones we get asked about are Wegovy or Monjaro. I think Monjaro was approved in September 2023 in the UK, so it's fairly recent. So what I would say is there's not lots and lots of research about it. You could always also try emailing your neurologist to ask them as well. But we do know that these weight loss drugs do appear to be safe from what we've seen so far. And it might be something worth exploring if you're wanting to lose weight, and to help do it in a safe way.
Moving on then, so
Okay.
on the next one that we're starting to hear about a little bit more is vaccines. I wonder what you could tell us
Yeah.
about that.
I mean, every year we tend to get asked, is it safe to have a flu vaccine? Is it safe to have the COVID boosters for people with MS? The answer to both of those is yes. We have heard another question, Nick, we get asked is it safe to have them on the same day? Because sometimes people are called to have them on the same day. So, yes, it is safe to have them on the same day. What we sometimes suggest to people is having them on a different arm, so that you're not too achy. Because obviously, some of the side effects that you can experience from a vaccine might be an achy arm, can be a bit hard in bed to not know what side to sleep on if it feels a bit bruised and achy. Usually, the side effects are fairly minimal. Obviously, if you were to get flu, it's not a very nice virus, or likewise, COVID isn't. So, by having the protection, it means that you're protected somewhat in having it. The flu vaccine isn't a live vaccine. The spray is that children have, which is like a spray up their nostril, but the vaccine itself is an injection. So it's safe for people to have with MS, and it's not a live vaccine. The COVID vaccines can be a little bit more tricky, because sometimes we hear from people that they say their symptoms have flared up more, of MS symptoms, be it fatigue, or it might have affected their mobility a little bit more. What I would say is it's kind of to be expected. It's kickstarting that immune system. So it's doing what it needs to do. So chances are you might feel a little bit more, symptoms might feel a bit more flared up in a day or so following the vaccine. And then shortly after, it should start to flare, settle down. It's basically doing what the immune system is meant to be doing, like I said. So some people don't get any side effects. So, there are both sides of things. And really, it's up to you whether you have them. It's not our job to say that you shouldn't have them or should, but we can advise, give advice. And and it's a personal thing. But obviously, it can be better sometimes to have the vaccine than experiencing the actual full-blown virus, which, as we know, can be quite nasty.
Thank you, Corinne. And here's a
Yeah, that's all
question that
right.
we're starting to see more and more, some of these subjects.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about Botox, fillers, and tattoos?
Oh, yeah. We do get asked about that. I mean, that's it's basically they're cosmetic procedures that people might want to have done. So yeah, I can tell you a little bit. I would definitely, again, I would say check in with your MS nurse. Um, I think we know that people do have tattoos that have MS. Obviously, things like piercings and things. If you're having an MRI scan, you've got to probably take all of those things out because they're metal. So we do know that they are safe though for people with MS. Tattoos, Botox and fillers, I would definitely seek the advice of your MS nurse. But as a medical procedure, I think it is something that people can have done. You know, it might be Botox in lips or fillers in lips or wrinkles on the forehead or those kind of things. So yeah, I would say there might be a chance that your symptoms might MS symptoms might flare up a bit more because you're having something done to your body that isn't quite, you know, it's a bit away from the norm, should we say. But definitely check in with your MS nurse as well, just to make sure that you know, it's safe for you to have done. Yeah, and of course, Botox is a treatment that is approved to help with bladder as well, helping to manage spasticity and spasms. So you know, it is something that can be done as a treatment.
Corinne, just as you were talking there, I've just started to look at my own wrinkles in the camera.
Yeah, Nick, me too. I could see them on my forehead.
Yes, well, yeah. Here we go. Good old life, eh? There we go.
Yeah.
Speaking of bladder issues, Corinne, so next up we've got a question from someone who asked, how can I spot a UTI and stop it in the first place?
That's a good question, because obviously, as we know, UTIs can flare up other MS symptoms. So sometimes if you feel like you might be having a almost pseudo relapse or a flare up that might not be a full-blown relapse, it might be linked to a UTI or an infection. I mean, sometimes things like ingrowing toenails or any other form of infection can flare up symptoms as well. I think what I find is a difficult one with UTIs is that I think sometimes people are scared to drink too much. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle, because you're not drinking too many fluids to prevent urinating too often and having to go to the toilet, especially if at night, if it's more difficult to get to the bathroom at night time. Sometimes people are concerned about their bladder where they don't want to go to the toilet in terms of don't drink as much. So I would say don't limit your fluid intake. It's really important to drink, I think it's about 6 to 8 glasses of water a day. Also keep in mind that if you're drinking teas and coffees, they can dehydrate you as well, teas and coffees. So try not to class them as your daily intake. Make sure that you have a glass of water as well as a tea and coffee. We do know there's been various research conducted into cranberry juice. So maybe drinking cranberry juice can help prevent them as well. From what I know of, and also the research on our page, there's not a clear link, but people do find that cranberry juice can help with urine UTIs and help recovery from UTIs, and sometimes help prevent them if you're feeling like you might be coming down with one. There is also another supplement that we've heard about called D-mannose. It's a supplement that people can take. And I think there's been a lot more research into that with UTIs, and help possibly bad proteins not stick to the walls of the bladder. So it helps sort of keep the walls of the bladder smoother. So there's a D-mannose supplement that might help as well. And I think MS nurses know a little bit more about that as well. And there's lots of tips on our bladder page as well. And I think on our bladder page, it will link to preventing a UTI at the bottom as well. So that takes you to the following page, which you can then have a look at as well. But, you know, the key is to keep hydrated as well, and not to avoid that drinking because of the fear of having the bladder urine infection and the fear of going to the toilet. It might mean that you have to urinate more, but at the same time, that's can help prevent them as well.
Yeah, we will make sure we link to all of those pages as well below. So, Corinne, so next up, we've got, how can we talk about more taboo subjects? So, you know, things like sex and MS. Talked a little bit about bladder issues, but bladder and bowel, sex, some of these things that are more sensitive. What do you think?
Yeah, they're tricky. And I think, again, Nick, you mentioned about our online shop. I think it would be definitely worth people exploring our online shop for free publications that you can download or print, download as a PDF or order a printed copy. So we've recently had the Sex and MS for Men back in stock, that book. There's also the Sex and MS for Women. They're in the shop. What might be worth doing is downloading those, because that way you can then have a look at them with your partner. It can sometimes feel a bit intimidating if you don't know how MS might affect you. So, communication is key, to talk through with your partner about things. Have a look at that book. There's other things that they might be able to do that can help. I think also I'll be honest with you, we do get calls from men sometimes about problems with having an erection or all those sort of things. So I would say have a look at our website pages. There are pages on the website that deal with each of those problems individually. We do hear sensitive issues on the helpline, and I think sometimes it's about being communicative as well. There are, for example, there is the charity Relate, where you can have couples counselling and talk to them about things that might be affecting you as well. And sometimes mentally, some of these problems can come about, not only from a physical point of view with MS, but it can be mentally as well. So, communication is key, and sometimes couples counselling might help.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Corinne. And thank you
That's
so much for
okay.
joining us today and answering all of our
Oh,
questions. We really, really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, Nick. I hope that helps. And anybody that would like to call our helpline, we're open from 10 till 4, Monday to Friday. And no question is taboo, really, is what I'd say. We speak to people about all sorts of things. So, do feel free if you want to have a chat about things. And sometimes it can help to have that non-medical approach as well, just talking things through. It's been an absolute pleasure, Nick. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Oscar. I work in the fundraising team at the MS Trust, so I'm part of the inner workings of the charity, and I often get to see firsthand the hard work that goes into providing our services. I also hear why people choose to support us, why they give their hard-earned money, and why they entrust us to use that money to help people with MS. I've always thought of the MS Trust as embodying the quote, "Knowledge is power." The MS Trust wants to empower you and all people living with MS with the confidence to make key decisions and choose the treatment options that are right for you and your loved ones, to better manage your symptoms and your daily life through greater understanding of MS. Knowledge of MS gives you power rather than MS having power over you. I've had the privilege of talking with many people living with MS and those supporting the MS Trust. Honestly, I'm proud to work here. The MS Trust is a special charity, small but mighty, a real powerhouse of energy, striving forward to continue to improve services and understanding of MS here in the UK. We want MS specialists to be able to provide top quality healthcare wherever they are in the UK. We want to place MS nurses and advanced MS champions in areas of the greatest need. We also educate every new MS nurse and MS healthcare professional to enter the NHS. We want to ensure that everyone affected by MS has access to the latest and most relevant information about the condition, information that they can trust. Our specialist team are experts at gathering the information you need to make sense of MS. We couldn't do any of this without you. With no government or NHS funding, we rely on the generosity of our supporters to help make the difference for the MS community. Thank you for supporting us. Without you, the cogs don't turn, and ourselves working here can't maintain the workshop at the MS Trust. There will be a lack of support that people with MS deserve without you. We are here to answer your questions, calm your concerns, fill the gap before your appointments, help share the news of your diagnosis, and support you if you have progressive MS that advances. In short, we're here when it matters most. If you can this holiday season, think about giving a gift to the MS Trust. You could make a difference to the lives of people living with MS and their loved ones. If you can give today, we send you our heartfelt thanks. Thank you.
Welcome back. Thank you, Nick and Corinne. That was, as always, very interesting. We have a new guest, another familiar face or voice, if you're just listening. It's Dr. Claire Winchester, our Head of Information and Engagement at the MS Trust. Hello.
Hello, Helena. Lovely to be here again.
It's really nice to have you back again. It's been a busy year at both the MS Trust and in the MS world. Could you tell us a little about what the MS Trust information team has been up to?
Yes, we've done lots this year already, actually. We sent out a big transport survey and have turned 999 responses into a really fantastic report, which really identifies all the challenges that people with MS face in transport and travel outside the home. So that's gone down really well. You might have seen it in the news or picked up in your local papers as well. We've got new books out on fatigue and sexual dysfunction for both men and women. And we've developed a new checklist to help people with MS who are struggling to disclose their MS, to start that difficult conversation at work with their managers and colleagues. So yeah, I'm so proud of what the team has been doing so far, because of course, as well as all that new content, we've also been answering your questions by email, by telephone, and in social media, and really helping to bring some kind of evidence-based information to people wherever they are.
Yeah, it's been very, very busy. So much stuff going on. Now, Claire, we invited you over here because we wanted to have a little talk about something that you see pop up in questions quite a lot, and about how to diagnose MS. And one of the things, one of the components, I guess you could say, is the McDonald criteria. Could you explain what this is?
Absolutely. So the McDonald criteria will be, essentially, it's how your neurologist reaches a diagnosis of MS. Most people with MS now will have had a neurologist make that decision, and they will have used they'll have used the McDonald criteria to do that. And they start with what they know about you in terms of what you've told them about your symptoms over the past months and weeks and years, and the results of any tests that have already been done. And they'll take all that and look at the criteria to see what additional tests they need to perform in order to be sure of their diagnosis. So with MS, they're looking for what's called dissemination in space and dissemination in time, which is how you get the multiple bit, basically that more than one event has happened. And they can tell that because of different symptoms or different relapses that you've experienced, or by viewing in your brain different areas that have been affected.
That's right. And at this year's, at the big ECTRIMS conference, it was announced that there would be some changes to these criteria. Would you be able to talk us through this? And what does it mean for those who are not yet diagnosed?
I think it's worth remembering that those new criteria are not in place yet. They were announced at ECTRIMS, so a lot of neurologists have worked very hard on them so far, and then they were presented to the wider neurological community at ECTRIMS. But there will still be a peer-reviewed paper that will come out. So until we've got that publication, I don't suppose anyone will really be using them yet. But what the new criteria do is they show how some of the newer tests, the newer diagnostic tests, can be used as evidence within those criteria that we talked about. And they also are looking at including the optic nerve as a special and separate region of interest. So the upshot is that it might do away with the need for lumbar punctures for some people, which I'm sure would be really welcomed. And ideally, it will help some people with MS get a diagnosis earlier. They won't have to be waiting for something to happen which fulfills the criteria, and as a result they should be able to be given treatment sooner, and maybe as a result hold off the accumulation of disability. I mean, we all know that prompt diagnosis and prompt access to effective treatment is really fundamental in good outcomes for people living with MS.
So kind of watch this space, and I guess the MS Trust, we will definitely report on it when we hear something new.
We certainly will, and I expect at some point in 2025 this journal article will come out and we'll be able to see it. And we will talk to some more neurologists about how they plan to incorporate it. I've heard some very positive things from neurologists who are very excited about these new criteria and think it will allow them to do less invasive testing. But I've also heard from neurologists who are concerned that their particular hospital might not have access to those new tests, and in using these new criteria could exacerbate inequalities within the health service as a result. So what's important is that, as far as possible, people get the same high quality of treatment, they get the same swift access to neurologists and to diagnostic testing. I think the criteria are kind of a step along the way, maybe.
Yeah. Another thing that we get asked a lot is, what type of MS do I have? My neurologist haven't told me. Now, this can get very confusing at times, can't it? Could you talk us through what are the types of MS, and maybe give us the bit of a history of how they came up with actually having these types?
Absolutely. There's a lot of people out there will have different ideas about what their MS is. Some people might not even have been told, and that might be because your neurologist wasn't able to make a definitive statement about what your MS was like. But you'll be familiar, I hope, with the notion of relapsing remitting MS and progressive MS, either secondary or primary. But we know there's people out there who have maybe relapsing progressive MS or secondary progressive active secondary progressive MS. I mean, what does that mean? What is active the same as progressive or the same as relapsing? Or, I mean, ultimately, the old classification was that relapses were something different to progression, and the older research, the urgency was in stopping the relapses because they were very visible, they were very obviously causing people huge problems, and they thought 20 years ago maybe, they thought that if we could dampen down the relapses, would have stopped people getting worse, would have stopped people's MS progressing as well. Now it seems to be the case that that's not really true. That distinction of relapses and the inflammatory action that causes relapses on one hand, and the just steady accumulation of disability or progression on the other hand, they probably both happen to everybody in different proportions. And maybe what's happening across a single person's journey is they're going from a highly inflammatory state to a state where the inflammatory action isn't so significant, but the progression is more significant. And so I expect we'll see that kind of thinking become more mainstream. And I think that might really the trouble is the way the NHS licenses drugs for use in MS will have to do a lot of catching up, because the drugs that are prescribed in MS are prescribed for these very narrow types or or groups of types of MS. And if we start sort of taking a step back and going, well, really, it's all MS. And what matters is the degree of inflammatory activity or the degree of progression, and what's driving that progression. Is it the relapses, or is it something that's happening independent of relapses? Well, those that's going to cause a lot of discussion, I think, a lot of research, and a lot of a lot of confusion potentially over the next few years.
Do you think that we might be moving away from the current type classification? And if that's the case, what is that going to do to the treatment options? Because you already mentioned that.
Well, I think when we were thinking about, okay, all these drugs which are for relapsing remitting MS, for people who are showing inflammation, where they've got bright spots on their MRIs, where they're noticing relapse symptoms, a lot of drugs are targeted there. There are more drugs now that are available for progressive MS. There are drugs for people who have got they might have a diagnosis of secondary progressive MS, but if they can show there's still some inflammatory activity, then they can be eligible. So I'm hoping that ultimately we'll get a better sense of what drugs work at what stage and what they're working on, and maybe we'll have some drugs coming through the pipeline that are working on different methods of action, that work in a different way and are targeting different processes in MS. So I think, as I said, we've got to step back a little bit at some point, but we're not ready yet in terms of the way drugs are licensed to start prescribing drugs that are licensed for relapsing remitting MS for people with progressive MS, because the reason they're licensed for relapsing remitting MS is because those are the people that they work on. And when they have tried them on people with more progressive kinds of MS, then they've found that they're just not as effective. And nobody wants to expose people to drugs and their side effects unnecessarily.
No, that's very true. We are going to be looking in the next podcast that we're doing about some of these new terminology, because there's been a lot of kind of new words popping up as well, hasn't there?
Yes.
Which are sort of relating to these things.
So you heard me mention sort of independence of relapse activity. So PIRA, progression independence of relapse activity, and RAW, so relapse associated worsening. Those are essentially the two ways that your MS can be getting worse, that you can be progressing. One is the inflammatory side and one is the progressive side, and that is, it's very confusing. I know we've talked, we've heard from people in our community that, how does that relate to secondary progressive MS? How does that relate to what I'm feeling, what my neurologists are telling me? I think can be incredibly confusing for people. But I think, and I'm looking forward to hearing, the jargon busters that we're going to be doing later on as well, because I think that'll really help to kind of distinguish what's happening in the research community and how they're describing what they're looking at, compared to what's happening in the clinical space, what's happening in the conversations with you and your MS nurse and you and your neurologist, and how those are separate. So I think that'll be really helpful.
Yeah, it should be very interesting. So look out for that one next year. Tied into this, what we were just discussing, obviously, is that there is some very welcome news in the way that there is some treatments in the horizon, or in the pipeline at least, for progressive MS. We had a question recently that I wanted to ask you. When do you know when you've reached secondary progression after relapsing remitting MS? Is it still between 10 or 15 years after your initial diagnosis, or does this alter now with the treatment, because we're getting more proactive with treatment?
Absolutely, we're more proactive with treatment. We've got more highly effective treatments available. We're still lagging a long way behind Europe and other countries in terms of how frequently we're treating people with those effective treatments. But in terms of what happened, essentially what they used to call the natural history of MS, what happens in somebody who was not taking any treatment at all, they would maybe be diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS, and maybe 15 years, somewhere between 10 and 20 years later, the relapses would have died away, but yet their disability would be worsening. They would say, well, this is probably where you are at secondary progressive MS. Now, we don't, because people are getting on treatment early and staying on treatment, we don't know when that switch might happen, or whether that's a really irrelevant thing to be asking at all. So I think the shift is about thinking, when's the right time to stop taking disease modifying drug? It's quite a difficult thing to, when you've been used to taking something and you've been confident that it's been working, it's been keeping you healthy, keeping relapses at bay, there's got to be a lot of worry about when to stop. You and your neurologist will have to discuss this, and they might say, well, listen, chances are really good that if we stopped you now, the inflammation that was causing your relapses might not reappear. It might have been permanently stopped by now. It might have gone right down, but it might bounce back. And it's really hard to know what's going to happen. And that's where that kind of clinical expertise of the neurologists comes in. And if you leave it too long to come off those drugs, I mean, some of them, the effective drugs are, they're pretty powerful and they have long-lasting effects. But if you leave it too long, what other side effects are you being exposed to that you might not need to be? And as we get older, we're more likely to accumulate other conditions, from diabetes or lung issues, or all kinds of things. And they might need treatment as well.
Yeah.
So as we go through life, we are more likely to be experiencing polypharmacy, which just means taking lots of different medicines. So maybe it's worth reviewing fairly regularly what you're taking, for what reason. Is it possible that any of these drugs are interacting with each other? Is it possible to switch focus to treatments that are making a better, that are focusing on your quality of life, the things that become more important maybe later in life, like toilet issues, sleep, thinking and memory? Are there different treatments that you could be taking, or different choices you could be making? And this is where MS specialists come into their own as well, and support that decision with as well. So I think it's fair to say there's not really a right time. It's not easy to say, well, you absolutely, after 15 years, you can stop taking DMDs because your MS will have gone to sleep, because it's probably going to vary hugely from person to person.
Yeah. As with everything with MS, it's very depending on the person, isn't it?
Absolutely.
To give away some more spoilers for the next year, we are going to be doing some work on progression and MS, aren't we? So there might be more to
Yes.
talk about on this subject in the future.
Absolute focus from thinking about MS as separate different conditions, and instead thinking about MS as one big condition that's got inflammation and progression all wrapped up all the way through is really helpful, I think, because it means that we can focus in our information, we can focus on the commonalities of experience, the things that will be important to everyone living with MS, and we can start talking about them earlier on as well, because it's really helpful to be ready for what's coming rather than just being told after it's too late to change anything. So that's what we're working on at the moment, and I'm hoping in the new year you'll see a new book from us on progression and MS. And of course, all the new treatments that are coming through the pipeline, we'll be adding those to our online decision tool, MS Decisions, and we'll be adding them to our books and charts and things so that you can carry on having up-to-date and that's completely evidence-based. And we hope it makes a difference when you are going back to your neurologist and your pharmacist and talking about the treatment regimes you're on and whether they're still appropriate and what the right thing for you would be.
Thank you so much, Claire, for coming on here and talking about this. And I guess we'll all be watching this space with interest, both from us, from the MS Trust information people, and also from the big world of MS and research.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.
Big thank you there to Claire and to Corinne, our guests from the MS Trusts, and thank you for answering all of the questions that the MS community have been putting to us all year round. So we will end 2024 with a reminder that if you do have any of those burning questions, we are here for you. You can get in contact with our helpline team, which does include Corinne. You can call us from Monday to Friday, apart from UK bank holidays, and that's between 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Outside of those hours, you can, of course, leave us a message and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Number is 0800 032 3839. If you'd rather get in contact with us via email, that's absolutely fine. You can get the hold of the helpline team. That's ask@mstrust.org.uk. We do also have some updated Christmas opening times as well over the festive season. So make sure you check on our website and our social media channels before you call.
You can also find us on the social media channels that you would expect us to be on, which is Facebook, YouTube, X, TikTok, and Instagram. And you can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Amazon Music, and in other places you would be listening to your favorite podcasts. And this video is also up on YouTube. We always like it if you give us a review, or you could maybe drop us some comments on the video. And let us know what questions you have, or maybe you can even let us know what topics you'd like to see covered in the next year. We also, if we can ask now, as it's, the festive season, and I hope me and Nick have been on your good list and not the naughty list. But if we have been on the good list, we would love it if you gave us some reviews on the podcast as well, because the more people that leave reviews will work. So the algorithms makes other people find us as well.
That's right, Helena. And just from everyone here at the MS Trust, we'd like to say a big thank you for all of our listeners for the whole year. We'd like to wish you very happy holidays and a happy new year as well. We will see you back in January.
Bye.
Bye.